Hello and welcome back to this damn fool crusade. I am damn fool of Loxley and my accent is going to fall completely in and out of place as this video goes on. I can't keep that up. Sorry, I couldn't resist. Hello and welcome back to this damn full idealistic crusade. Of course, I'm going to be talking about the new Arrow video release on 4K UHD of the 1991 Robin Hood Prince of Thieves, which is a film that honestly, it seems to refuse to go away in terms of its impact, significance, and its hold over people, much like the monster Bryan Adams hit song, Everything I Do For You, that it spawned, that also seems to never quite fully go away. This is a film that is, to say it is a mixed bag is an understatement. It has a very loyal fan base, but then also it has a lot of people whose feathers it kind of ruffles. It does play a bit fast and loose with Robin Hood legend and does build upon some things that came immediately before it, particularly the television series Robin of Sherwood, which was the first really to go for the gritty reimagining of the Robin Hood legend and add in the elements of magic and mysticism and folklore to really impart into the Robin Hood legend. And this is one of those films that, at least for me, the first time I saw it, I found it a very frustrating experience, and especially with the seemingly excessive length in either cut you look at, because the film was taken away from its director and edited by the studio down to the 144-minute theatrical release version, which was the standard until the extended version took over, which added back in about 11 to 15 minutes of additional subplot sequences that were removed. That's just apparently only a fraction of what was originally removed from the original shooting script draft. That made, of course, an already long film seem even longer, and then the theatrical cut disappeared from viewing ability unless you had the old Laserdisc or the very first DVD edition, which was pretty much a port of the standard def Laserdisc Video Master. So that makes this new Arrow release, which has both cuts of the film, both the original 2.0 Dolby SR theatrical release mix and the 5.1 remix done for the extended cut and lossless audio quality, with brand new extras and this absolutely gorgeous new 4K transfer from the original negative with HDR Dolby Vision grading. It makes it a really welcome experience because it makes the fans happy. It makes anybody who wants to see the theatrical cut again happy. You have both cuts available with both sound mixes present, a whole wealth of new extras, and a beautiful new transfer. So I think on video, this film has finally been given more of the justice it deserves, and it remains a truly... I think this is one of those really perplexing films because even if you don't like it very much or you have major problems with it, which I still do, it manages to, every time you come back to it, eventually sort of wins you over in a way. And even though I don't think it is at all one of the truly great Robin Hood films, and I don't really think there are with all the various adaptations, it's kind of hard when things started out at a point and you had not one but two masterpiece versions that make all the others seem tame or smaller in comparison. So whenever you even mention Robin Hood, you're going up against the immortal 1938 Adventures of Robin Hood starring Errol Flynn, one of the greatest films ever made. You're also going up against the immortal 1922 Douglas Fairbanks in Robin Hood, which is one of Fairbanks's silent epics. It's one of the great silent films, and I think if any film had to come in second place to the Warner Brothers Technicolor masterpiece, it would be the Doug Fairbanks picture, which is still grossly underrated, and I highly recommend anyone who has never seen it, please stop what you're doing, go and see it. It is absolutely worth your time. It is one of the great silent films, and of course it's one of Fairbanks's legendary swashbucklers. But that's the pedigree you have, and of course there are so many adaptations of Robin Hood that have been done through the years, and almost all of them have their own particular charms, and some push the legend in different ways. Some push it more in the direction of Ivanhoe, which is really the novel that cemented the idea of Robin Hood the outlaw, the character we think of, because the legend itself has gone through many different permutations. And of course, you can choose to believe whether Robin Hood was actually a real person or if it was entirely just a myth, a story that was made up and passed down through the years. It's a fun historical argument to go through. But Prince of Thieves remains elusive in a certain way. It's a film that every time I come back to it, it wins me over a little bit more, but I've always been impressed more by the production values and chiefly the fact that this is one of those films that no one's ever going to make again, because everything is real for real. There is no digital work going on. It's all analog. It's real people on horses. The lead actors are doing their own horsemanship, and they actually went out to real locations, and you can see how miserable everyone is, covered in mud and freezing and getting dunked in the river. So I've always felt essentially that the production design of Prince of Thieves and the score by Michael Kamen, and also very especially the photography by Douglas Milsom, who of course was Stanley Kubrick's cinematographer of choice for his late period career, and has shot many great films and is one of the great cinematographers of his generation. I've always felt the core production elements of this film, and being filled with some of the great names in the British film industry at the time. A lot of old hands in the industry, and even you have Paul Weston, the great stunt coordinator who worked on some of the Bond films, doing the stunt coordinating here. So if you go down the crew list, you see so many key important names in the British film industry in their respective areas. So it remains an impressively made film, even though it has a lot of issues baked in, which I will get into a little bit. But I just find it a fascinating film to study. Every time I think I'm done with Prince of Thieves, when I come back to it, I rewatch it again, it wins me over a little bit more, and I find myself wanting to read more about the production history and things. So that's why I was really happy that Arrow went to the lengths of commissioning, creating, and producing an entire new documentary about the making of the film, getting together with as many of the original crew members as they could, and at least giving a better portrait of the actual journey to production and the actual production process, with a little bit of discussion of the post-production and the aftermath of the film. I think the factor I discussed, or I've mentioned so far, about how the film seems to continually perplex me, and I want to know more about it, and I come back to it every couple of years and kind of begrudgingly, oh well, I guess I'll watch this again, and it wins you over a little bit more each time. And I think there's a sort of nostalgia factor for those who saw it on the original release. It was one of the most successful films of 1991, and it came out at a time where there was more interest in the Robin Hood legend. Famously, there were multiple productions going on at the same time, trying to get off the ground, and even some pretty much all of them trying to attract Kevin Costner, who was one of the biggest stars in Hollywood at the time, to play Robin Hood. And he wound up going with this film, and eventually the others sort of fell by the wayside, except for the Robin Hood film that Fox eventually made. That was released as a TV movie here in the US, but did get a theatrical release overseas and in the UK. That makes a fascinating comparison to compare the two, because that film is not quite as grandiose, but it is a bit more story focused. I think it's quite a bit tighter, and it is, I guess you could call it maybe a little bit more traditional in its telling of the Robin Hood story. But it has been a while since I've seen it. I would really like to go back and see it again, and also particularly because it's a Fox film, that means it's under the Disney banner, and unfortunately it's probably going to stay only on Laserdisc and DVD, unfortunately. But there was basically a lot of Robin Hood sort of in the air, and that does seem to have been jump-started once again by again the success of the television series Robin of Sherwood. And when you go and look at that series, it becomes clearly obvious that it was an enormous influence on Prince of Thieves, right down to fans of that show and a lot of people saying that Prince of Thieves downright lifted ideas and concepts from Robin of Sherwood, which does seem Of course, I wasn't there in the writers' room, but it does seem very plainly obvious that it was an extreme influence, right down to, you know, having the magic and mysticism, and having the idea of a Moorish character inserted into the merry men. So that is, again, the chief primary influence, and they were trying to stay away from doing what people thought of in terms of Robin Hood, in terms of green tights, and specifically the image we all have, which is The Adventures of Robin Hood from 1938. That is why it's the definitive Robin Hood film. So, of course, if you're going to do the Robin Hood legend as a film, essentially you better be darn sure that you've got a point, you've got a take on it, you have a really good story, and you've got the energy and the panache to pull it off. Now, to get into more of the nitty-gritty of the film discussion and my own personal thoughts on it, Prince of Thieves, of course, was released in 1991. It was shepherded to the screen by its producers, who were also the screenwriters, Penn Densham and John Watson. This, of course, means that you have a direct connection to the people producing it, or also the screenwriters, so they're on the film every day in terms of the whole production gestation, and with people asking for things to be tweaked and rewritten, they're the ones there, they're the ones doing it, and they're able to fight for and shepherd their vision to the screen, which is something that rarely occurs. So that I think does always assist a film in terms of keeping the original screenwriter's vision intact, when of course they're the producers. But it's rather interesting and amusing when you hear them talk about the whole idea for starting the project, that they wanted to get back to more of ideals of heroics, and have something that the whole family could go and see, that Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves would be a family film. And then, of course, you get to the film itself, and even in the opening sequence, we have hands being chopped off, and the film is full of beheadings and violence and all kinds of nasty stuff, and the tone is frequently extremely dark, and so much so that you don't quite know how it got away with the rating that it got, which is something that later on the British Board of Film Censors, the head of the BBFC said that his greatest regret was letting Prince of Thieves go out with a lower rating, because of the sheer tone and the content. And also, in particular, there's one moment in the climax that I think everybody knows what I'm referring to, which I'll discuss a bit more later in detail, that is extraordinarily out of place and off-putting and terribly just... it should not have ever been there. It's really terrible. So all of that combined into what is quote unquote a family film is a truly bizarre concept. I understand that and it's pretty obvious what they're meaning by that, and that's why a good number of Robin Hood films have been marketed to children. It's a classical legend, and it appeals to everyone's sense of heroics. It's one of the timeless tales of storytelling, so that obviously makes sense. But to apply that moniker to Prince of Thieves seems, they say that multiple times in all the various extras over the years, and that's quoted a lot. And it makes me laugh every time, because if you've ever seen this film, the last thing you think of is, oh, this is a family film. But of course, the idea was to make the Robin Hood legend believable again, to avoid the cliches of Lincoln Green and Adventures of Robin Hood, to essentially ground the character and the mythos in a more realistic sense, with a veneer of historical accuracy, actually starting in the Crusades era as the character would have started, and very few film adaptations actually do. Ironically, one of the only other film adaptations to actually start in the Crusades is the Douglas Fairbanks silent version. That's one of the things that really sets that apart, because it actually starts in the Crusades with some battle sequences. Those would also carry on, of course, into the Ridley Scott film Robin Hood, made with Russell Crowe years later, which honestly seems to take a lot of the setup of Prince of Thieves, except it's really designed more as a prequel film, and very much in keeping with the style that Scott had established with Russell Crowe starting on Gladiator. But the one thing that film does well, that Prince of Thieves has major issues with, is that the Scott film has a consistency of tone. And any screenwriter will tell you that is extraordinarily important. Prince of Thieves has no tonal consistency. And in fact, that is really, I think, its single greatest problem, is that the tone is all over the map, and so much so that it feels like you're rubber banding back and forth between light and dark all over the place. That, I think, seeps into everything people say about the performances, everything people say about the story construction and the general plot of the film. You can't ever get a handle on the tone that Prince of Thieves is going for. And once you understand that and you sort of isolate that as a singular problem, for me, that's the sort of key to understanding why I really enjoy things in Prince of Thieves, and why I still have major hangups with it, and why the first time I saw it, it was extremely frustrating, because you can never quite get a read on it, and that's because the tone is so inconsistent. So whether or not you're a fan of Kevin Costner's very internalized performance, that it makes a direct contrast to Alan Rickman's Sheriff of Nottingham, which is the scene-stealing, biggest, boldest thing in the film, and that's why that's the one thing everyone remembers from Prince of Thieves, is Alan Rickman going to say that he's over the top as the sheriff. Does not even, he goes past over the top, but he is bringing a necessary energy to the film that otherwise isn't there. And ironically, he's doing the energetic boldness that is supposed to be the Robin Hood character, and the Robin Hood character is internalized, which is typically what the villain of a Robin Hood story is, whether it's the Sheriff of Nottingham, or Guy of Gisborne, or Prince John, or whoever you're using in that particular story. Typically, the aristocratic villain is the reserved, internalized, scheming, and consistently foiled, whereas Robin Hood is the bold outlaw. That's kind of the structure of how the tale goes. And so to sort of flip that on its head is an interesting take, but it also highlights the consistent tonal shift that just, to say it's not even a tonal shift, it is literally that there's like bits of tone all over the place, and you can never get a read, or you're never on an even footing to say, okay, now this is a swashbuckling adventure film, or this is a historical period film, heavy drama, and then you have wacky bits of comedy here and there, and you have some fourth wall breaking, and then it's also a romance. But then there's just once you start, you'll start driving yourself crazy, because again, this film, it's one of the biggest cinematic mixed bags I think that there is. And the more you study it, the more you can analyze how things developed, what they sort of pulled from earlier Robin Hood adaptations, principally the Robin of Sherwood series, how they tried to work with the Robin Hood legend, and how they tried to modernize it for the early 1990s, and what a summer tentpole blockbuster film was expected to be at that time. And also how apparently they didn't worry about the runtime, because even in its studio-edited theatrical release, we're still talking about a film that's over 2 hours and 20 minutes long. And it also is having to do the whole origin story of Robin Hood, the setup of the Merry Men, even though they never actually say the Merry Men. They do omit quite a bit of the typical Robin Hood legend. There is no mention of Prince John anywhere in the entire film, which is a bizarre sort of aspect, because that is a key character in almost every single Robin Hood adaptation, and really getting into the political backstory and backstabbing that John is doing to attain the throne of England. Well, here pretty much, we don't even have a Prince John. It's all just the Sheriff of Nottingham. That's all fine if you're distilling the story down to its barest elements and you're picking and choosing what you're doing, which is what they did. But it never settles on what tone it has. And again, as I said, it bounces around so much in what the tone is. It's almost as if each individual scene sets a tone for that scene, and then we go into the next scene or sequence, and the tone is completely different. So it doesn't even seem to match from sequence to sequence or shot to shot. And for me, upon many viewings and reviewings and reflections and things, I think that's the key issue with the entire film. There are many other things you can point to. Again, a lot of people like to point out Kevin Costner's performance, particularly the sort of flip-flopping between having an accent or not having an accent. That was a discussion he and the director Kevin Reynolds had, and they couldn't really agree on it. And so basically you sort of have a back and forth, and then everybody just kind of gives up on it, which honestly also sort of dovetails, I think, with a lot of other things in the film, where you have a bunch of cooks in the kitchen and nobody can quite agree on something, and eventually everybody just kind of throws up their hands and let's just move along and get to the next shot on the shot list, which again goes back to the constant feeling of tonal inconsistency. So that's why, again, I don't want to sound like I'm harping on this one thing, but rewatching the film this time and comparing the two cuts again and digging through all the extras, I was really struck finally by, I was able to put my finger on it. That the tonal inconsistency, I think, is the one thing that's always rubbed me the wrong way most. I think you also get that in some of the character arcs, particularly Maid Marian, who is actually wonderfully played by Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio, who was a very last-minute addition. The pre-production of this film was very rushed and harried, and they were trying to beat the other Robin Hood projects to the market, essentially. Which didn't help anybody. But she starts out as a very strong character. She's introduced in now what is sort of a cliche of being disguised and being able to fight the hero in terms of swordplay and match him blow for blow. And then, suddenly over the course of the film, by the third act, she's a damsel in distress, and it just comes out of nowhere, and you keep wondering, well, what happened to the feistier Marian we started with? Usually, if you use the Adventures of Robin Hood sort of character arc for Maid Marian, as played by Olivia de Havilland, the typical Maid Marian she is the aristocratic person with a real heart of gold who doesn't necessarily listen to what her heart is telling her. And over the course of the film, Robin Hood awakens this in her, and she sees the plights of what the people are really going through, and then essentially changes allegiances and has a legitimate character arc that develops over time and is perfectly intermeshed with the romance. Well, here you have the vestiges of some of that. The romance does develop, but instead of awakening to become a more fully fledged human being enmeshed in the problems of the people and what's going on around her, she becomes a damsel in distress and becomes the sort of prize or property for the Sheriff of Nottingham to physically take, and for Robin Hood to have to save in the end. So it's unfortunate that what starts as a strong character essentially just disappears and becomes a damsel in distress, literally just screaming in the entirety of the climax. And again, to go into the thing that in the climax, specifically with Marian, that should have never have been there, was I think you definitely have a problem when you have a Robin Hood film that the whole climax hinges on not just can Robin Hood save Maid Marian from the Sheriff of Nottingham and save the day, not just can he keep the sheriff from forcibly marrying Maid Marian for his insane desire to claim the throne of England, but also to save Maid Marian from being raped and brutalized by the Sheriff of Nottingham. That's where you just... This is supposed to be a Robin Hood film. Historical action is great. Going for a grittier tone's great. Having a darker story being told, that's great. That's fine. But why did somebody think that was a good idea? There have been Robin Hood films in the past, in adaptations, where the sheriff or the villainous character or one of the villains has lecherous designs on Maid Marian. That's perfectly fine. You even get that in Ivanhoe with similar characters. It's not a new story concept, but to take it to that length and to make it so graphic, particularly the really terrible moment when they actually put the camera on the floor between Marian's legs, it's just appalling. And the only thing that keeps you from turning the film off or averting your eyes or something is Alan Rickman's intensity and inherent whimsicalness he brings to his over-the-top sheriff, that's the only thing that sort of undercuts the extreme uncomfortability of that sequence. And then we of course go into the final sword fight and things. But I think that's a really key moment to highlight of how tonally inconsistent this film is. Not only has Maid Marian's character arc completely just thrown out the window and her whole character is essentially gone, but what they do with her in that climax is just really terrible. Should have never been included. And every time I see the film and I get to that point, it's even more glaring when you see the film again. Apparently people just didn't think about it back then, but the critics definitely picked up on this, and the overall darkness of the film. Again, this is not a quote unquote family film, so that's why that really cracks me up every time. But you also, I think, have that personified in the character of Will Scarlet, is played by Christian Slater, because he appears at certain seemingly random intervals throughout the film. We don't get his character backstory. It's saving up for a particular reveal towards the end of the film, but he just always seems out of place. And of course, it's Christian Slater in his younger days, so you can't help but think he wandered in from the set of Heathers or Pump Up the Volume or something, and is just kind of there, and that's not his fault at all. It's just that's all there is for this character, and he's not helped by just seemingly being made to look as if he just sort of wandered in, and it's like he's from a different movie. And in particular, there's an ad lib towards the end of the film that he does that was a bone of contention between the director, producers in the studio, and the editing process. Is one of the things that everybody seemed to focus on, and they were battling over amongst many other things, which is why the studio eventually stepped in and edited the film themselves. But it's an ad lib that totally breaks the fourth wall. And the first time I saw this film, that's where that was the moment that tore it for me. And I couldn't take the rest of the film seriously at all, because it was like, they had that was like the last straw, and it's like, okay, the bridge has been burned. I'm so done. Because I was already so frustrated, which I know is not the feeling that everybody had back in '91 when this film was so hugely successful. And of course, many people have great nostalgia for it. And I say all this stuff. I don't hate the film. I don't dislike it. I know I disliked it the first time I saw it. But again, there's something about it. It's so elusive, and every performance in it is very good. The casting is really excellent, and the real standouts, of course, are Alan Rickman's Sheriff of Nottingham and Morgan Freeman as Azim, the Moor who is introduced in the beginning and essentially becomes the new right-hand man of Robin Hood instead of all of the merry men. And he has the wonderful sort of character of being the wise outsider, and who is there for reasons of a life debt, but is continually and very humorously perplexed by the savagery of all the English that he is surrounded by. So it's a wonderful performance from both. They're really the highlights of the film, and because Alan Rickman is so over the top and he's putting so much energy in there, you always know when he appears, you get excited again, because you're like, okay, now we're gonna have some fun. There's gonna be some levity, there's gonna be some energy. And again, what he's doing is what you typically get from the Robin Hood character, the lively, wild, brash outlaw. All that stuff is being done by the completely insane Sheriff of Nottingham. So it's good that somebody's contributing that energy, and this is all stuff that Rickman apparently wanted to do, because the last thing he wanted to do was play the stereotypical villain of a swashbuckler, which is really more of what was written on the page. And when you think of this film without Rickman's energy and without him pushing the role into that territory, it plays differently, and it would be a little bit more consistent in terms of everything else would thus match better, but you wouldn't have any sense of glee, because this is a very dour film. There is very little humor in it outside of what Rickman is doing, and in terms of building up the sheriff into a more dimensionalized character, even though he is going what would be called, again, to say it's over the top, that's he does, that's where we get the wonderful bits, like, changing the line from, I'll tear your heart out for this, to I'll tear your heart out with a spoon. It's just those extra accents and those extra bits. That's what sticks in the mind, and that's why he is the most memorable thing in the film. Whenever you say Prince of Thieves, all anybody talks about, the first thing they say some of the sheriff quotes, like "Cancel Christmas." It's the thing that people enjoyed coming back to the most in the film, whether they love the romance of the film, or they love the score, or they love other things. The one thing everybody can agree on is Rickman's performance, because it is the most alive thing in the entire film. And then you turn to what Kevin Costner's doing. And of course, people have said and pointed out, and quite correctly, that he had just come off of Dances with Wolves. And by that, I mean he had literally not even finished the final editing before he was on a plane, suddenly being thrown into a freezing, icy cold river over and over and over, when they were shooting the quarterstaff fight scene, and of course also the Robin's first arrival back on his home shores, when he jumps off the boat and falls into the water and everything. So people said, oh, well, he was just exhausted and tired after Dances with Wolves, and I'm sure there was probably some degree of that, obviously. But Costner's always been, at least in my own reading, he's a very internalized actor. He likes to think about everything he does. That's really, I think, his signature style, and he knows what works for him best. And of course, he's a phenomenal actor. But he would not be the person I would immediately think of to play, oh, Kevin Costner would be perfect as Robin Hood, because Robin Hood is a very energetic character. So when you don't have any of that energy, and you have Kevin Costner being very internalized and giving an excellent performance, it's just not what you expect or really need in the Legend of Robin Hood, no matter how gritty you're making something. So if this was to work, you would have to have everything tonally consistent with that. And this goes back again to why why I'm focusing on the tonal inconsistency throughout the entire film, because it makes all the other elements stick out. There's no cohesion in Prince of Thieves, which I think is probably the easiest and best way to summarize why the film is extremely long, why it has all these different elements, why it doesn't ever seem to fully come together. But you can't look away from it, and every once in a while you feel like rewatching it. It's kind of, I think, become, especially in the UK, because it's rerun on television a lot, it's kind of become one of those favorite rainy day or Saturday or midday Sunday weekend films to rewatch. And I have seen it gets rerun on television all the time. Why, I don't know exactly, but it just has that sort of air about it. And you're also dealing again with the classic story of Robin Hood, even though this makes many changes to it. So it's a hard film to describe. There are people who absolutely adore it. There are people who have great nostalgia for it. It was hugely successful at the box office. It had a very good marketing campaign, but of course you also had the selling point of the monster success of the Bryan Adams song, which of course was developed out of the love theme that Michael Kamen came up with. And Michael Kamen's score in this film, if anything, was a pure swashbuckler in terms of its tone. It's Kamen's score. Kamen is really scoring. He scores this film extremely well, but he's really scoring a Robin Hood film in his head. He's really scoring for a pure Robin Hood film. And think it's kind of a shame that he never got to do an out-and-out pure swashbuckler. This is probably as close as he got, and he is a very underrated film composer still. People just think of him for Die Hard and Lethal Weapon most of the time, but when the material really suited his style, he was really great, and this is one of his most famous scores with good reason. Again, the photography by Doug Milsome is absolutely beautiful, and it really gets across the beauty of the production design. I think the real standouts, again, the score, the production design, the photography, the usage of real practical locations, the fact they actually went out there and did all of this. When you come back to this film, you just marvel at it, because no one ever does this again. This is a film no one's ever going to make again, because it is 100% analog. Everything you see is real for real. There is no CGI whatsoever. That's really Kevin Costner and Morgan Freeman on horseback in the sequences. They do everything they can. There's beautiful stunt work coordinated by Paul Weston again. The sword fights are well done. The action is well done. And I think for the most part, Kevin Reynolds does a very good job with the direction, even though this wasn't really his type of film. He had never really done a big, giant action film before this point. But he did have a good relationship with Kevin Costner. They'd known each other for years. They had made the film Fandango together. So it is viewed as perhaps in order to try and get Costner to look and agree to do this project, that they decided to hire Reynolds as the director due to his relationship with Kevin Costner. Which is seemingly exactly what happened. But Reynolds does do a very good job. The only thing I've never understood, and my one major issue with the actual direction and staging, is particularly in all the interiors, but overall there's a focus on shooting a lot of stuff in close-ups or very close shots. There's very little establishing work, and it really does disservice to a lot of the sets and the real castle interiors they were using. Because when you look closely at this film and you think about it, the first thing you think of are people prowling around the corridors. There's almost everything is delivered in medium shots or medium close shots, and you thus don't get a real sense of the world outside that, unless we're in the exteriors. And the establishing shots we get for the exteriors, where they actually go to Hadrian's Wall, if you think about it, when Robin first arrives on his home shores again and they're walking around, you get a sense of scope and scale. When they first go into Sherwood Forest, we do get some longer establishing shots, but after that, everything's back to being very close again. So that's the one thing I've never understood, and it still perplexes me a bit. That, of course, became much more commonplace over time, and now that's pretty much all you see anywhere. The art of establishing master shots and visual staging is not what it once was, but when you start looking at it very closely, you will notice that the majority of this film is shot entirely in very close shots and close setups, and there's also usage of some wide-angle lenses causing a sort of it's not going for a distortion effect, but it does have a little degree of that when you have shots that are already framed and staged so closely. And when you have a wide angle, it does give that sense of sort of hyper reality. So again, if you look closely at a lot of the scenes between the sheriff and Guy of Gisborne, particularly when they're scheming and the sheriff is going over his plans and things, and they suddenly walk into a huge close-up and these wide lenses, it does have that slight disorientation effect, which I guess is what they were going for. The same things when the sheriff goes down for his black magic readings with the witch Mortiana. You get a degree of that there, and of course they fill it with mist and everything. So I think it doesn't help it doesn't show off the beauty of the production design as well as it could. There's also a lot of darkness in the photography. There's a lot of shots and sequences that are very, very dark, which makes this a very tricky film to handle on video. A lot of the older transfers were very contrasty, very bright. They were artificially brightened, I would think, and even there are scenes that are quite, those scenes are still quite dark, but to actually time this film properly for home video is a very difficult prospect. So that's why I was really looking forward to looking at this 4K UHD presentation and the Dolby Vision grading, because this is a film I've always felt really should and could look a lot better on video, but it would require new scans and a lot of work and technology put into trying to fully replicate the photography. So in spite of the close setups and things throughout, this is a really beautifully shot film, and of course shot on film by a great cinematographer in real practical locations and real sets that were built, completely real for real. This is the type of film they don't make anymore, and that makes it a better film all these years later, because it's sort of an artifact of a bygone age. Now, this film should also be acknowledged for really sparking off the interest in the 90s of actually thinking and doing historical set period films as bankable, because this film was, I believe, the second most successful film in 1991 behind T2, which is really something to marvel at, that a period Robin Hood film could come out in 1991 and make all this money. So when you look at the historical period films for the rest of the 90s, they do actually follow a sort of precedent set by Prince of Thieves. So the effect of this film carries throughout successful films and unsuccessful films, and also that it goes then eventually into television. So to be honest, the more I look at it, I don't really think you would have all of these historical period or adventure or literary adaptations in the 90s without Prince of Thieves and without it being so hugely successful. I think this goes all the way into the television series like Xena Warrior Princess and the Hercules series and all the stuff that spawned off of that. I think you could really tie it and go all the way up to probably at least The Mask of Zorro in 1998, even though that's a completely different setting. It does still work in a period adventure style, and it is doing a classic character, and it, even has a rather well-staged sword fight between the hero and heroine, as you get a very short version of in Prince of Thieves. And you could maybe even go a bit further and stretch it all the way to the influence extending to The Mummy in 1999 that Stephen Sommers did, even though that is very clearly riffing on and pulling directly from the Indiana Jones films and the 1940s Universal Mummy sequels. I don't think without Prince of Thieves, Universal probably wouldn't have greenlit The Mummy in the way that it did, and Prince of Thieves spawned all this stuff leading up to that point. So really, I think Prince of Thieves is that key film at this time in the early 1990s that made historical period films and historical adventure films in particular at least bankable in studio eyes, because they could always fall back on, the Costner Robin Hood picture made a crap ton and had that song, so as long as you got a song, you can have this amount of money and we know how to market it. We'll just do what Prince of Thieves did. I think this lasted up until Ridley Scott doing Gladiator in 2000. I mean, once that came out, that sort of started a whole new wave of how to do historical period adventure films and historical dramas and spectacles. But of course, that also ushered in the usage of CGI in that realm. So that's basically becoming its own separate thing. So basically, I think you have Prince of Thieves in the early 90s, and then you have Gladiator in 2000, and they each spawned a wave of historical films. The most obvious, I think, what followed Prince of Thieves is when Disney did The Three Musketeers a couple years down the road. It seems designed to basically repeat the Prince of Thieves formula, but what they very, wisely realized is they needed a consistent tone, and they needed to make sure that it would be marketable and suitable for child audiences. So if you want to call something a family film, that's what actually fulfills that label. But it's also very shrewdly calculated to be a Prince of Thieves type box office success, right down to having the song at the end credits designed to be another massive hit single. and not just having Bryan Adams, but also having Sting and Rod Stewart come in for a whole trifecta of giant names. That film was successful, nowhere near as successful as Prince of Thieves, but when you have Disney trying to repeat that formula by having the attempt at a hit song and having a scenery-chewing, scene-stealing villain performance by Tim Curry in that film, it's very clearly modeled on Prince of Thieves, but it does have a consistent tone. So it's fascinating to I think look at those back to back and study what Disney's approach was to this sort of formula at that time. But I think it's fascinating to look at Prince of Thieves' legacy because I do think it is very important, because I really do think it is the film that cemented in studios' minds, okay, we can do historical adventure films every once in a while. We'll just make it like that Prince of Thieves movie. So this is a film that has legs to it in terms of, it has a longevity. It doesn't go away. It's a film that sort of sticks in the mind. It does have a very strong fan base, but then it also equally has a strong fan base of people who don't like it, or who prefer more traditional Robin Hood tales, or really dislike certain elements of it. But I think everyone can agree it has really great strengths to it, and it is really admirable for being one of the last tried and true. They went out and they just made the thing real for real. They went out into the real world. They really built sets. They really did stunts. This is a movie where Kevin Costner walks out with a bow and arrow and fires it in front of a wall of fire in terms of the explosion that goes up behind him. And that's really Kevin Costner firing an arrow in front of a wall of fire. When have you seen that in the recent past? And that's really Kevin Costner standing there going, you said this was going to go okay. If I get killed or if I get burned, I'm going to kill you guys, There's a difference between what we have now with actors in front of a green screen or in front of ILM's volume and being able to do anything that somebody wants in a computer realm, and having your lead actor walk out and fire an arrow in front of a live explosion that makes a wall of fire behind him. That's what you used to get. And as many issues as I have with this film, and how I still have major problems with it, and it is nowhere near perfect. It is nowhere near even one of the best Robin Hood films, I would argue. I always will admire it for its production design, its costumes, its photography, its musical score, and the fact that everything is real for real, and the cast is excellent. There's so many elements there. I just it makes you really frustrated because you wish that everything worked. You wish that the soup had been boiled down in the big pot and everything had been focused more, and had more energy and drive to it. How you would have gotten there, I don't necessarily know. It might have helped to have a more energetic Robin Hood. Again, I myself would not have, immediately thought Kevin Costner as Robin Hood. And amusingly, something that occurred to me when I was looking at all the extras, there's a one of those wonderfully cheesy made-for-TV documentaries that's really a promo about the movie that's coming out. And as usual, they have a celebrity host this and do all the talking head bits in between the commercial breaks. But they have Pierce Brosnan doing the Robin Hood Man, Myth, the Legend documentary. But he has such enthusiasm and energy. He's really kind of over the top in terms of this is just some dumb made-for-TV promo piece. But he does it with such panache and with such a twinkle in the eye that I'm sitting there thinking, they got the wrong guy. Imagine. And then I couldn't get it out of my head. Imagine a Pierce Brosnan Robin Hood at this time in 91 versus Alan Rickman's Sheriff of Nottingham. Imagine if you had a Robin Hood in this film who had that twinkle in the eye. I mean, when you don't have the twinkle in the eye as Robin Hood, really loses something. And then the more I thought about it, the more this crazy idea started to really appeal to me. And then, regardless if it was this film or not, I just started thinking, what a missed opportunity to not have Pierce Brosnan play Robin Hood, the legendary outlaw, at some point, because I think he could really sell it. He could do the action stuff, and he could do the romance, and he could do everything with the twinkle in the eye. And now I just can't forget this idea. I think it would have really been something. And you could have started in the Crusades. And I think the perfect person for doing this now what if scenario. I'm now rewriting Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves in my head because I'm a crazy person. In this alternate universe, I now picture, okay, well, if they had Pierce Brosnan as Robin Hood, everybody else stayed the same. Probably the perfect person to direct it was Nicholas Meyer, who had done the underrated film The Deceivers with Brosnan, and he plays a military character there and dealing with the Thuggee cult in a historical drama with elements of an adventure film. And of course, Nicholas Meyer had just done was finishing up Star Trek VI by this point. I don't know if the time schedule would work out. Of course, this is my own what if alternate universe. I'm a film nerd thinking about this stuff in the middle of the day. I'm sitting there at work and I'm like, what if Pierce Brosnan had done Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and Nicholas Meyer had directed it, but everything else stayed the same? Wouldn't that have worked? Yeah, I think that would have worked. Because that's just what I do. So yeah, I think in an interesting alternate universe, that would have been a very interesting film, and that would have addressed the again, it's not Kevin Costner's performance at all. I think he is great in the film at what he's doing. It's just not your typical Robin Hood, and being so internalized and pensive when Robin Hood is a very proactive, to the point, a hero of being brash and being maybe a bit foolhardy in places, getting captured, for example. That being so internalized doesn't necessarily gel with the swashbuckler character, But anyway, that was just a particular amusing idea that popped in my head. So that's now my what if, And of course, if they really wanted to go dark, when the surprise cameo of Sean Connery shows up in the film, and you find yourself going, "Where have you been this whole time?" It makes you wonder, if you really wanted to go dark, what if you had Connery in the film more, and if you really wanted to go for the gravitas and make the story really have, well, for lack of a better term, make the story have balls to it. You could have gotten John Milius to write, or even direct it too. I mean, that would be a different film, and that is also an extraordinary, exciting prospect of what if there was a John Milius Robin Hood. That would certainly not be a family film, but boy, would it be interesting and out there, and talk about playing with real history in the Robin Hood legend. So now I have two great what-if scenarios of Robin Hood films I wished existed. An alternate universe where Pierce Brosnan played Robin Hood, and another one where John Milius made a Robin Hood movie. Just think about it. The man behind Conan the Barbarian, the film, getting to do Robin Hood, that's just like, wow. But anyway, those are just some interesting thoughts that came to mind. Because again, this is a fascinating film to study. I feel like now I feel like I could teach an entire college course on filmmaking and all different aspects, and the movie business and story construction and production design, just all the aspects, by studying a film that doesn't quite work, by using Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. I feel like I could teach a whole course in college just with this one film to use for examples and to get people to look at and sift through. It's one of those films that the more you look into it, the more that's there, and the more you start questioning and wondering and thinking, okay, well, how would I have done this? How would I have taken this story element? Would this have been better if this was edited differently? If the film was shorter, is it better longer in the extended cut? It's an interesting thing to ponder. And lastly, I want to touch on the film's novelization by Simon Green, which I have behind me here. I happen to have a copy of this because I stumbled across it in a used bookshop, and I absolutely adore tie-in novelizations. It's really a lost art in terms of film marketing, something that doesn't happen anymore. And anytime I see a cheap one, I pick it up and I have it on my shelf and hopefully get around to reading it at some point. So I decided to read it after revisiting the film. And it was written by Simon Green, who is apparently a pretty well-known and regarded author of a lot of science fiction and fantasy novels and various series. And this does follow the shooting script, but it is the more of the uncut shooting script. It has the materials that were reinserted into the extended version, and also it has some bits and bobs throughout that seem to have been also deleted from the film, because we know there is other stuff that was not in the either release version. But I think the most rewarding thing about reading the book is the novelization has a consistency of tone throughout. Almost all the events are the same. It does have a lot of, some little bits of business here that must be part of the scenes that were deleted from the release version, and it has the subplot that forms the footage that makes up the extended version. So it's not, full of surprises as some novelizations are when they're based on earlier drafts. So it's not like it's full of dozens of deleted scenes. But what's really interesting is how Green writes and actually rewrites and restructures a little bit some of the dialogue, some of the character interactions, and he manages to make the whole story flow much better. It has a consistent tone. And I'm sitting here reading this and thinking, okay, well, outside of a couple, bits not in the film, this is pretty much just the shooting script. But then I started noticing that the actual flow of the dialogue was a bit better. And then I started looking at and realizing, oh, well, this is a bit different. This has been rewritten. This has been restructured a little bit. And I started realizing what he was doing. In doing this, he manages to give Robin Hood as a character more energy, a bit more of a backbone. He's still internalizing a lot of stuff, and he's carrying all this guilt as he does in the film. But he's more approachable. He feels more like what you think of Robin Hood when you just think of the character image in your head. All the characters seem to have a bit more dimensionality to them. You even get a little bit more in terms of how Will Scarlet is characterized, even though he's only appearing in little bits here and there as he does in the film. So, and also with the Sheriff of Nottingham, you have the biggest change because he is as he is written in the original script. So you don't have any of the Alan Rickman beautiful over-the-topness. There's no cut your heart out with a spoon. It's just, I'll cut your heart out, Loxley. It's very straightforward, but he's still extremely villainous. And because Robin is strengthened as a proactive character, and all the characters are a bit enlivened, and the actual flow of events is a bit better by having not just the extended cut subplot, but a lot of other little bits peppered throughout, and a lot of little tiny additions to sequences and things. A little sentence here, a paragraph here, a little bit of additional business, such as the opening, when we first see the grouping of villains when Robin's father is murdered at the beginning. It's different in the novel because we're introduced to the idea of the cult more, and Mortiana's even introduced there, and she's performing some of her black magic rites and things. And we get more establishing right there in the very beginning. So it's just a little tiny bit. It's like really just a paragraph or two, but it's little tiny additions like that throughout the entire novelization that enlivened the whole story. And to be quite frank, I think the novelization is actually better than the film because it is consistent. I think it sands off a lot of the rough edges of the film, and you can read it and actually hear Michael Kamen's score in your head, and you can picture characters and moments from the film, but I think it just plays better. There's a lot of extra little details scattered throughout. So if you're a fan of the film, I do highly recommend tracking down an old copy of the novelization. It's very well done. I think it's very, very nicely polished. I think all the characters and the situations do actually improve. It's not as all over the place as the film. You don't have the beautiful Alan Rickman over-the-topness as the sheriff. But I do think the book actually has more energy to it. And again, that consistency of tone, it was really rewarding. And that made me just double down on my theme of the film being total inconsistency. So in any case, this is a fascinating film to really mull over and think about and pull apart and chip away at. And I think that's why it sticks in the mind. And I think that's why it calls for so many repeat viewings, because you could never quite put your finger on it. I think even people who love it, it's hard for them to describe why exactly they love it. But it's still a very fascinating mixed bag of a film. And I guess to talk briefly about the difference between the two cuts. The theatrical cut is a slightly better paced experience because, of course, it is shorter, but the film was already long. The theatrical cut is over 2 hours and 20 minutes long. So even with that, and being the editing supervisor brought in the legendary Stuart Baird, who of course was a longtime editor for Richard Donner and cut the original Superman, and later went on to even a directing career, I don't think he could really do a whole lot with what was there other than tighten things. And the major thing they took out was the subplot that was reinstated for the extended version. This is the subplot with the Sheriff of Nottingham and Mortiana the Witch, and explaining why they have such a deeply and shared connection. I don't want to spoil it for those who haven't seen the extended version or don't know. It's not exactly something that ruins the film by it not being there, and suddenly the film being 10 to 15 minutes longer makes an already long film that was too long even longer. However, the first time I saw the extended version, I didn't really think it was necessary, but the more I think about it, and whenever I come back to this film, I do watch the extended version, because this is a subplot that adds to these two characters and adds to the overall meaning of the story to a very significant degree. So when that's not there, it kind of causes... It leaves a hole. There is something missing when it's not there. And of course, before the extended version came around, unless you read the novelization or you somehow had older script drafts, you wouldn't know about it, and so you wouldn't think about it really. You just think, oh, well, the sheriff just has a witch because he's interested in black magic. But I think the extended version is actually necessary. So even though it makes a long film longer, I think once you see the extended version, I do think it makes a lot of the things in the film play better, and I think it makes Rickman's performance richer. It adds a number of interesting little scenes that do add to the sort of scope of the world that's being depicted. So now I've kind of switched. I used to think the theatrical cut was better, but now if I have to choose, and what I rewatched for this, I did rewatch the extended version, because it's kind of a matter of, if you're going to rewatch this film, you might as well go ahead and watch the extended version and get that extra subplot, because it is the most major thing that was removed, and it does add quite a lot to both of the characters. And again, once you know it's there, once you know that was part of the film and then removed, when you watch the theatrical cut, you can kind of feel that, okay, well, this is where we're supposed to have this scene, and you can't divorce that in your head from the sheriff's character. So you go back to the theatrical cut, but you know what the subplot was that was removed. So I do think the extended cut is the actual better option. But I'm very thankful the theatrical cut has finally been preserved here on home video and is also available in this beautiful new 4K master. So with all that out of the way, because this is one of those films that I just fall into a rabbit hole every time I come back to it, because it is just a fascinating thing. And again, I feel like I could teach a whole college course about films and just talk about Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, because there's so much ground you can cover in terms of all the aspects of film production. So now to talk about the beautiful new Arrow release on Blu-ray and 4K UHD. This is unfortunately a UK exclusive, but I think it is so well done. It is an easy recommendation to import. And of course, the 4K UHD disc, there is no region encoding on UHD titles, so you can just import it without worry. Like most Arrow releases, this is sold separately, so unfortunately this UHD is just a single UHD. There is no Blu-ray disc included. The Blu-ray version is sold separately. There's also a variety of different limited artwork packagings that have been sold, and there are also some steelbook versions. So if you're interested in some of the different art designs or the steelbooks, you will have to go to specific retailers or try to find ones, because I'm sure they've already started selling out, as Arrow does a number of limited editions when they do fancy packages like this. So to talk about the transfer itself, this is a brand new 4K scan from the original negative. It is absolutely beautiful. It has been encoded in Dolby Vision in terms of the HDR encoding. In terms of what you're going to see, I threw on the old Warner Brothers Blu-ray, which is based on the old extended cut DVD master. It was an old master to begin with. It's an older Blu-ray, and even upscaled to 4K on an OLED, it didn't look as horrible as I thought it would. It held up okay, but it definitely showed all the drawbacks of how this film has looked over the years. And then I also threw on the Laserdisc 2 just to remind myself of how the LD looked, and it actually looks pretty similar to the overall appearance of the old Warner Blu-ray. And then I popped this disc in, and as I was hoping, my jaw hit the floor. The overall appearance of this film with this Dolby Vision grading on the UHD disc in 4K, it's almost like a time capsule, because it felt almost like I'm sitting there on my OLED screen, and I felt like I was seeing the film fresh in a theater in 1991, or seeing not even a release print. It felt like I was looking at a studio source when it was new, or an Interpositive or something. This is an absolutely beautiful presentation. If you love this film, you need this disc. If you love seeing beautifully produced discs and new scans of film catalog titles, this is a must. The brightness levels, the color, the contrast are handled here better than I've ever seen this film before. And I think even if I ever got to see an original release print of this, it would, that would be the only thing you could compare to this disc. This so wipes the floor with the old and now seemingly ancient Warner Brothers extended Blu-ray that you can just pass that on, chuck it, whatever you want to do, because this will allow you to rediscover this film entirely. It looks absolutely beautiful. And in particular, I was waiting for the key moment where I knew, okay, if they get this right, the real selling point, the best scene in the film is, of course, the center point of Robin and Marion's romance, when we have the morning in the beautiful shrouding mist, where Robin takes Marion to the boat and sends her away from Sherwood, and we have the whole romantic moment, and the Everything I Do theme comes in, and you actually get it said, and it's the real emotional center point of the whole film. But it's beautifully shot in that morning mist, which must have been a giant pain to actually photograph on the day. But that was the scene I was waiting for, and just to see how this 4K presentation would handle it. And before on older video masters, on Laserdisc it dealt with it a certain way, DVD did, in terms of standard def video, and trying to deal with the fine particles of the mist and keeping the faces in focus, and it would be a very tough scene to grade on older formats. But here, with the ability to go much deeper in terms of nuances with HDR and Dolby Vision, that is the real knockout. So if you want to see a beautifully graded sequence of a real film shot on film from a catalog title, I think this is a really nice demo disc. And that scene in particular, when you get this, if you really want to see what this transfer can do, just go to that sequence where Robin and Marion part in the morning mist outside of Sherwood Forest, and that's one of those scenes that that will sell you on the 4K format, that'll sell TVs. This is a really stunning transfer. It's better than even what I thought it could be. And also really interesting is it handles the dark scenes as well as you possibly could. They're still very dark, particularly throughout the opening when Robin and Azim meet in the prison when dudes are getting their arms chopped off. Those scenes are of course still dark as they were shot very dark. But there is no brightening going on in any of those. They are really presented as they should be, and you do thus get a bit more noise in the darkest scenes. That's always been on all the transfers of this film. They've never been able to hide that because it is baked into those shots. So I love that all this stuff was properly maintained and left as is and as it should be. And with the HDR grading on top of the 4K resolution and the new scan, you're able to get much more of the nuance of every single shot and camera setup. And as I've always thought and felt, I think catalog titles with new scans benefit the most from HDR because you're able to see all these nuances that were not able to be conveyed before. That's why I think the greatest benefit for the films that benefit the most from HDR are not just catalog titles shot on film, but going back even further, I think 3-strip Technicolor, special processes, large format, of course, but probably most of all, black and white titles really benefit from HDR. So here you get a much greater visual nuance across the board in brightness, contrast, clarity, and the color timing seems spot on. And again, you get the real impression that you're looking at a print that was preserved perfectly from 1991 in a time capsule. It's a really amazing looking transfer. I do recommend this to anyone with 4K abilities. And of course, the Blu-ray, it will be this same master, but in SDR without the additional benefit of the Dolby Vision grading and the uptick in resolution. So if you're still just doing Blu-ray only, you can still get this beautiful release as the Blu-ray, but you won't get the benefits of the Dolby Vision grading 4K. And also the Blu-ray will be region locked, so you will have to have a region-free player if you're importing it. But this is one of those titles where I do really think the UHD is an absolute knockout, and it helped me rediscover the film again. If you haven't seen the film in a while, or if you're a giant fan of this film, your jaw will hit the floor. This looks absolutely beautiful. Both cuts are seamlessly branched on the same disc. There are no problems between the two. And on the older releases of the extended cut, the new footage did stick out a little bit. It wasn't jarring or anything, but here there are no real issues between the theatrical footage and the extended footage that's been sourced from different places. I did notice 3 very slight moments of seeing a little bit of a line start to poke in. One is when Robin looks through Azim's makeshift telescope, but that's always been in the film, and it's even in the clips from the vintage making of documentaries, so that's actually part of the original element. Then there's another one right before the sheriff's about to go down and see Mortiana for one of his visits. It's very faint and not complete, but you have that. And then there's also another one trying to poke in a little bit on one of the Sheriff of Nottingham's close-ups when he is talking to Marion inside the church after she's met with Robin in secret. And to be honest, I would much rather, if I had to choose between things to see, I would much rather see a little bit of a natural artifact poking its way through rather than see overzealous DNR application or digital cleanup that's automated, because that will quite frequently take out things that it thinks are artifacts and unfortunately start to erase or remove original details. So if I had to choose between seeing just a very fleeting strand of something or a mark or an extra scuff that got missed, I would much rather see that than see an automated process get too heavy-handed. So those were the only anomalies I saw in the whole transfer. They were extraordinarily fleeting, and I was very pleased to see again that the extended footage was really perfectly balanced in with the theatrical footage, so there's no major shift between the footage reinstated from another source. To talk about the audio presentation, we have two mixes, as I said before. We have the film's original 2.0 Dolby Surround SR mix. So it's a matrix encoded track, which will decode out into left, center, right, and mono surround. This is the film's original mix and how it was released in 1991. It was the standard release format at the time. And then we also have the 5.1 up mix that was done for the DVD extended edition. When you compare the two, and this was, obvious back when you could just do the Laserdisc and DVD versus the old extended Blu-ray. The 5.1 doesn't change anything in terms of effects and adds the new scenes in, but it has been tweaked and mixed a little differently in terms of the EQ and the overall effectiveness of the track. It's, of course, discrete 6 channels with in 5.1 with the discrete LFE track, but it's not as aggressive, it's not as punchy, it's not as dynamic feeling as the original 2.0 Matrix audio. So I think this is a clear case where the original mix is definitely the way to go, even though the 5.1 doesn't change anything and it is discrete. It's just not the original mix, and it's not as good of a presentation. And the other interesting thing is that when you select the extended cut and you select the original theatrical audio track, they've actually included all of the extended scenes in Matrix 2.0 stereo as well. So I don't know if that means that's how the scenes were originally mixed and they were able to just pull that with the extended footage, or if they had to just make a Matrix audio version of the 5.1 mix for the extended cut scenes. I'm not exactly sure how they did it or how what elements existed, but it is really rewarding that you can actually watch the extended cut with the theatrical audio mix throughout, and you're not stuck with the 5.1 mix. So that was a real surprise, and I was very pleased because this is now my preferred way of watching the film, the extended cut with the theatrical audio mix. Now, to talk about comparing this to previous releases, of course, that's what I do here. It's how my head works. So I did compare it to the old Warner Blu-ray, which again it's that same 5.1 track. So you've already got that here on the Arrow release. Now, the more interesting thing is to compare it to the Matrix audio presentation on the Laserdisc, which also has the original 2.0 Matrix audio in a lossless PCM, as was standard on Laserdisc digital tracks. Now, comparing them, they are the same theatrical audio track. There's no difference in the mix itself. No effects have been changed. Nothing's been played around with. But when you do a direct A and B comparison, I do think the audio that was provided for the Arrow release, it is a little bit louder, which is typical. And when you level match them, I do think the Laserdisc audio does edge out slightly, simply due to it feeling more, a bit more straight from the source and untouched, as most Laserdisc audio was. It's not only less loud, but it also feels a touch more dynamic. It also feels a touch less strained, so it feels a little bit more relaxed. And this is really obvious, I think, if you directly go back and forth playing them on your receiver, or especially if you put on a good pair of headphones and you compare the two. So again, it's the same audio track, but I do think the mastering and presentation of the source audio is actually a bit better on the original Laserdisc. So I do think the Laserdisc edges out, but of course the Laserdisc is the theatrical cut only. So if you like the extended cut footage, you will have to, of course, stick with the Arrow disc with the to get the original audio with the extended cut footage. But this is not anything that Arrow really did because the audio was provided to them by the studio rights holders, and this is just something that happens usually in almost all cases where when audio is provided, it's been retouched up or EQ'd or something for a release at some point, or streaming or something, or it's had loudness compression applied. So that's another reason why Laserdisc audio can be really important, even when the mix itself is the same and it hasn't been changed overall. It doesn't necessarily mean the mastering is the same. And a lot of Laserdiscs, the further back you go, are much more hands-off, taking stuff directly from a print master or interpositive, or sometimes the original magnetic source or the stems or just the source audio itself. So for fans of the film, and if you really love this film, I do think the Laserdisc audio is just that much better that it is noticeable. but that is entirely down to mastering that's been involved. And again, the audio was provided directly from the studio rights holders to Arrow themselves. So again, it's not anything Arrow did, and the Arrow audio still sounds excellent. But if you have the Laserdisc to compare by, I do think the Laserdisc is just that much better. I also think the disc encoding is excellent. It was handled by the legendary guys at Fidelity and Motion, who really are the best in the business at disc encoding. And I was very surprised to see that it's all on a single UHD disc. So both cuts of the film, all the extras, everything is housed on a single UHD disc, and it's really something to marvel at that you can do all of this on one disc nowadays with all the space we have, as you know, and it's actually still have beautiful presentations. Just you just master stuff properly, and you encode discs properly, and you can do things like this because it's so often the opposite, where the encoding is the last thing people worry about, and even on top tier releases you have major encoding problems. So that was really nice to see, and I can so heartily recommend this disc for that, among many other reasons. Now to talk about the packaging, we have the Deluxe Limited Edition in the nice, now typical textured Arrow hard case with the removable J card that has the information about the extras on the back. The hard case has the beautiful new art that was commissioned for this release, and it's really well done, and I think it's a great overall poster image for this film. I think it looks excellent, and unfortunately, the back, like almost all Arrow sets, is plain. So of course that's covered by the J card. But I never know why they leave these plain. I don't really mind because the rest is so lovely, but it is a little odd that the back is always plain. The new artwork goes over onto the UHD case, which again just houses the disc inside, but we also have the limited edition art cards. These replicate original publicity stills from the film, and each has the new poster art on the back, which is a nice touch. They're on a nice cardstock, very nicely printed. Some are even, of course, horizontal. And while it's not necessary to have things like this, it does add a nice premium feel, and they're well done. So, if you're going to do things like this, it's always good to actually do them right. And another nice touch, we get this beautiful artwork that mimics the classic Robin Hood etchings and drawings from the classic tales, but of course is retelling the events of the film. This artwork carries over onto the booklet in terms of how the booklet is designed, but it's a really lovely touch. It's not something they had to do, but I really appreciate that. Also, if you're like me and you're a real stickler for having original film artwork somewhere on the release, they have very nicely included the original poster artwork as the reversible sleeve, and it's nicely printed. And even though this is rather simplistic and very 90s in terms of its layout, I've always liked this as a poster image. I do think it is very striking. So I'm very happy that this has also been included, because of course it matches the Laserdisc too, and this is the original theatrical one sheet. Then we come to the booklet, which, as I said, carries over this artwork style. So it has a slight historical flavor to it, which I do really like, and getting to the idea of Robin Hood the legend. Carries over onto the back as well, and this sort of stone type design, I guess you would call it, carries over into the actual pages and the text, and we get more of these lovely drawings throughout. Then we have the essays that are more of a modern perspective on the film, in terms of it's got some bits from critics who are fans, and also who also talk about the actual production of the film. And then there's a whole image gallery. So this includes some of the various publicity stills. All of these are included on the disc as well, and some of these are also in the postcards, but these are also very nicely printed in full color. And then some are included in black and white as well. And these actually form the majority of the book, and it concludes with some behind-the-scenes stills. And then, of course, the disc credits themselves with the technical notes about the restoration and new scan. And also, this is where you get the mention of scanning the original negative, and that the sound was sourced from the original sound masters themselves. Of course, that was provided by the studio. And then, again, there's the rear. And then lastly, as Arrow likes to do, we have a lovely full poster of the new artwork. Apologies for the glare. I'm trying to fit all of this on camera if I can. And that's been nicely folded in, and of course it is reversible, containing the original one sheet being fully recreated as well. So you can hang this, and it's printed very nicely, so it is a nice display piece. Now let's talk about the extras, which is a quite substantial package. Of course, we have the new 4K restorations of both cuts with original and 5.1 remixed audio, the limited edition packaging with reversible sleeve and the booklet, and of course the poster as well. All of the legacy content in terms of the features are carried over, so we have both the audio commentaries from first with Kevin Costner and Kevin Reynolds, which is a conversation between the two. It is for the extended cut, and I did listen to both commentary tracks. So commentary one, it's nice that they're having a conversation, and they seemed like they've patched up any differences that happened after this film and Waterworld, where they kind of fell out with each other. And they do seem to enjoy, looking at the film again and talk about some of the various production things. But it's a very loose, informal conversation. So unless you're a big fan of this film or a fan of either of the two, it's not probably going to be the most super engaging track. It's not like you listen to it and get countless factoids about the making of the film that you maybe didn't know. They're sort of peppered in throughout, but I think it's still a worthwhile listen if you want to know more about this film or you want to study this film more. But again, it's a very nice, informal conversation between the two, and they just talk throughout the film. And then commentary 2, you have the producer/screenwriters, Penn Densham and John Watson, also joined by Morgan Freeman and Christian Slater. And it's basically very similar. It's a loose conversation with everybody in the room, but it's mostly the producers talking, with Morgan Freeman occasionally having a thing to say or to interject, and then randomly it seems every once in a while Christian Slater pops up. But it's mostly the producers, and it's very much the same. Not jam-packed with information, but it gives you their perspective and is very direct and very loose and informal as they just rewatch the film after many years. So it's kind of typically what you expect from most producer/actor commentaries after they haven't seen the film in a long time. So it works. It may not be a commentary you're going to return to a whole lot unless you're a massive fan of this film, but it is nice that both have been carried over, and I think they are both worth listening to at least once if you want to know more about the making of the film and the overall process of producing it. The legacy extras continue. We get the Robin Hood TV documentary from the time, The Myth, the Man, and the Movie, which is hosted by Pierce Brosnan. This is standard def, and it's also minus the commercial breaks, and it also removes, originally there were clips of various Robin Hood adaptations of the past included. That has been uploaded to YouTube, so if you're really curious, you can see the extra, slightly longer version with those clips and commercial breaks still in there. But this is one of those, exactly what you expect, early 90s movie promo pieces that also tries to act like a historical documentary. So it runs about 35 minutes on the disc, and it's fine for what it is, but the real reason you watch it is glimpses of production footage and behind the scenes material, and the hosting of Pierce Brosnan, who is wonderfully energetic, and it's really the whole reason why you watch this is just the sort of glee he has at doing the silly teleprompter talking head stuff as he's standing around various castles and libraries and things. So that was really amusing because I had not seen this in years, so that was wonderful. They included this as well. Then we get the archival cast interviews, which were also on the old Warner releases. And again, you look at those for the time capsule aspect and seeing the actors talk about the film when it was still new and fresh. And, they are what they are. They are promo interviews done and the big sort of press junkets that films used to have. So, again, they are what they are, but it's nice that they have been preserved here. Then there's also the Bryan Adams live performance of Everything I Do that was included on the old Warner releases. Weirdly, none of the modern releases, including this Arrow, include the original music video that they did, I think, at Slane Castle. For that, you have to go to the Laserdisc, which actually opens with that. So That's another reason the Laserdisc is important, because it has the original music video, which is not on the new releases, and this has the same live performance video that Warner did, and it's also upscale standard definition. Then we also get the isolated soundtrack cues in 5.1 that Warner put on their Blu-ray, so those are carried over as well. And then we get the original trailer and a bunch of TV spots. Unfortunately, these are standard def. They look pretty much the same as what was on the Warner Blu-ray. Would have been nice to at least get the trailer in HD, but I understand not doing that. Most releases don't, but I really enjoy getting to see the trailers and TV spots in any case, because I like to study the film's marketing history as well. So at least all of that is still included and carried over, even though it would have been nice to have those in HD as well. Then we get a really lovely image gallery, which has all the stills that are in the booklet plus more. And then the main draw is the new documentary that Arrow has made, which is called Here We Are Kings, Making Robin Hood Prince of Thieves. They got together with a lot of the original crew members. So we have interviews, brand new, conducted entirely for this release, with the producer screenwriters, with the director of photography, with the costume designer, with a lot of various other crew members, and again, with even more behind the scenes stills and material that is shown throughout the documentary. It's split up into several parts, and it runs somewhere around an hour in total. So it is nice and lengthy. So it's not a waste of your time. And honestly, if you watch this documentary, it goes over all the same ground that's covered in both commentaries, so you could get away with just watching this documentary and getting, most all your bases covered, and the commentaries aren't going to add a whole lot unless you want specifically those individuals' viewpoints. So if you just watch this new documentary, it kind of covers all the same ground, so you don't have to listen to both commentaries as well. The only thing with this in terms of the technical presentation, it's of course 1080p, but it does seem like there was a bit of a focus issue in some of the interviews, because I guess the people moved slightly forward or something. So unfortunately for some of the interviewees, for certain portions, it's kind of like they're slightly out of focus. Like, again, they just sort of maybe moved a little out of position, which is apparently something that's happened on a number of Arrow releases that I've seen some discussion in various forums and things. It's not bad or anything, but it is noticeable, especially when you're watching on a 4K television. And then also, rather oddly, the film clips in the documentary, when they show clips of the film, you would think they were the new 4K master, and I guess they are, but they have that frozen grain effect to them, which is rather unfortunate. So that is nowhere in the feature transfer whatsoever, which is beautiful. But when you watch the documentary, it's rather painfully obvious that every time they show a clip of the film, Kevin Costner's got his sword in hand, or he's about to fire a bow, and every time his arm moves, it's got the frozen grain halo. I've seen that a lot recently in some various Blu-rays and in UHDs, where the feature transfer is beautiful, but for some reason, when you get to the documentaries and things that have just been made, when they show clips of the film, even from the same beautiful new master, it's got the frozen grain effect on it. I don't know why that is. I don't know why anyone would do that, but unfortunately that just seems to be something that happened in the making of this documentary thing. It doesn't wreck the documentary. The documentary is still great, but that was something I noticed, which was rather unfortunate. The other thing, and this kind of goes into what I wish was here in the extras, there's not a whole lot, if any, modern critical viewpoints or interpretation of the film and its effects. So you have the people who made it talking about it, and you have people in the booklet writing about it who love it, but there's not a whole lot of discussion of the ups and downs and the negatives of the film. I do wish the documentary went more into the editing process. They do mention it a bit, and how Kevin Reynolds was sort of locked out of the editing process, and he kind of just washed his hands of the whole film, and that Stuart Baird was called in and things like that. But they don't go into the nitty gritty, and it would have been really nice and helpful if they did. But that's entirely down to that they're dealing with all they have is what people are telling them in the interviews. But I wish somebody had gone into it more. more. And I wish there was some sort of modern critical interpretation, like maybe even one of the sort of now standard Kim Newman pieces talking about Robin Hood films, which he did do for Indicator's Robin Hood Hammer set. But, something like that for some more historical context or context of the film and the place of other Robin Hood tales, or at least something with a more modern critical interpretation. I would have loved to feature it on just the editing of the film, or talking about the differences between the two versions or something. But the versions are pretty straightforward. But I wish that was there. But for what this is, it's a really well-produced documentary, and that's the main draw of the extras package, because the majority of everything else is pulled from the legacy extras. However, everything has been ported, so you can pass on your Warner DVDs and your Warner Blu-ray now, so you don't have to hold on to anything. Everything has been ported over, except the Laserdisc has the original music video and I think the slightly better theatrical audio. So I will be still having 2 copies of Prince of Thieves in the Laserdisc and the UHD. I think the only way this could be better is if they had somehow made a deal and included the novelization, because it's really well done. And so I technically will have 3 Prince of Thieves items in my collection: the Arrow UHD limited set, the Laserdisc of the theatrical cut, and the novelization. So those are my overall thoughts on Robin Hood Prince of Thieves as seen on the beautiful new Arrow 4K UHD limited edition set, which is a UK exclusive. I do think this is the best release of the film to date. I think it is a must-own title for all fans of not just Robin Hood adaptations, but fans of the film, fans of 4K UHD presentations of film content in terms of actual film productions, fans of all historical adventure period films. This is a film they don't make anymore, plain and simple. Whether you like it or not, you have to admire the hard work and effort that went into even pulling this off and getting it out on time. Everything is reel for real, and seeing this UHD presentation with the Dolby Vision grade really hammers that home. You don't see films like this anymore, and you unfortunately probably never will. So in that sense, it does have a little bit of the flavor of what Kevin Costner had done the year before on Dances with Wolves, and what was seen as reinvigorating the Western, but actually going out into the landscape and actually making a film on film with an actual point, and actually doing the work and putting the work in. Whereas today, you're not even going to get the opportunity to do that, and even if you did, there's going to be some digital work involved. There's going to be some sort of crutch to fall back on. You're not going to have somebody actually go out and make a production like this, make a Robin Hood film on practical locations and do everything reel for real. It is something from, unfortunately, what is now a bygone era. And again, seeing it on this 4K presentation really hammers that home. I do think it is one of the best releases of the calendar year of 2022. I do think it is a must-own release, even though you will have to import it. It's not terribly expensive, and I think if an American label does a release here, I don't think it's going to be anywhere near as spectacular or something, because it would most likely be, it's a Morgan Creek title, but those were typically handled by Warner Brothers, who just treated it as a standard studio title. And that old Blu-ray is now, it was already super outdated and very much showing its age. And this just, that is just, don't even, it is a complete non-entity now. So if you are at all interested in seeing this, please get a copy of this. It is an absolutely beautiful disc. Plus you get the lovely packaging, the lovely new documentary, and all of the legacy extras are ported over, so you're not losing anything unless you really love the original music video. So again, I do think the Laserdisc is still important for a couple reasons, but otherwise this is definitely the release to own, and it's just, again, it's one of the best releases of 2022, an absolutely beautiful disc, and it's a film that is forever sort of perplexing in a lot of interesting ways. It's a film I've come back to over the years. It has grown on me more. I think it grows on everyone who sees it. Even if you started out hating it, eventually it sort of worms its way into your heart a little bit. And it's a fascinating film to go back and study and sift through and look at the production and think about the what ifs and think about how you would handle adapting the Robin Hood legend. It's not necessarily what I would picture as a Robin Hood film. It definitely, if you think of Robin Hood and his merry men, the one word that you couldn't apply to Prince of Thieves is the word merry, which is probably why they never actually called them the merry men in the film. But it remains an impressive film of a bygone era. Everything is real for real. Everything is done in the old, what is now the old-fashioned way, even though this is only 1991. And I do think it spawned a whole new generation of bankable period action adventure films. Not necessarily that everybody was doing swashbucklers, but you could at least do something that could be termed a swashbuckler because Prince of Thieves was so enormously successful. And it is the Robin Hood of an entire generation who grew up on it and who saw it at a young age. And it is still what they have in their minds as the Robin Hood they think of, their Robin Hood. So it's also important for that reason. This is a beautiful must-own release, I think. I think the only way to improve upon it would be perhaps to maybe have a few more extras in terms of some modern criticism. And I wish the audio was as robust as the theatrical Laserdisc audio. But again, they're already quite close, and it's just an example where I do think the Laserdisc audio is just a little bit better, simply due to Arrow being provided an audio source that had been, slightly noise managed in some way. It still sounds excellent, and it's an absolutely beautiful release, and I was just bowled away at how amazing it looked. I knew this film always looked good. I never thought any of the video releases lived up to the photography, but this one finally nails it, and for that reason alone, it's a must-own disc. It's a 4K demo title of a catalog film title, and it will really give you a newfound appreciation for this film, even if you're not a fan of it. So I do wholeheartedly recommend this. I hope this has been at least somewhat fun and informative. If you can't tell, when I start thinking about this film again, I just go down a rabbit hole, and it's such a fascinating film to study. And as always, please do keep supporting both studio and boutique labels by buying films on disc to help keep physical media alive and film culture alive. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching.